Hi, in this short video, I'm going to walk through the first few slides of Activity 8-2, which is about making connections. In this short video, I'm going to talk about the differences between the different types of wires and the different gauges of wires and what that means. Also, I'll teach you the purpose of the wire, how to identify the purpose based on the color of its insulation. And finally, we'll talk about the names and purposes of different tools. So firstly, there are two types of wire. They're called solid and stranded. Solid wire consists of a single strand of conductor. There's a picture of this down here in the picture. It's the bottom wire. And you can see that the conducting part, the copper, is just one piece of copper. That's the stuff over on the left. Okay. The black material here is plastic. That's called insulation. Stranded wire is a different type of wire, and it consists of many small wires wound together. It's more flexible, and pound for pound, stranded wire can handle slightly larger currents than solid wire. And so there's a picture of stranded wire here, and you can see the strands, and this wire has white insulation on it. In our activities in class, we're going to be using solid wire. Okay, how about wire gauge? So wire gauge tells you how thick the wire is, but it's a little bit unusual. The smaller the gauge of the wire, the thicker the wire. And that means the more current that it can handle. So for example, 14 gauge wire is actually thin, and it can handle about 15 amps of current. There's a picture of that right here on the bottom, 14 gauge wire. Now 12 gauge wire is actually thicker, and it can handle more current. It can handle up to 20 amps. And so there's a picture of 12 gauge here. So I think what's a little bit unusual sometimes for students is the idea that the wire gets thinner as you go to higher numbers for the gauge. So 14 gauge is thinner than 12 gauge. So you should get used to that. And also know that the thicker the wire is, the more current it can handle. So in your house, you probably have a bunch of 14 gauge wire. But if you have a newer home, you probably have 12 gauge, maybe even 10 gauge wire. And the advantages to having thicker wire is that you can handle more amps. And in our homes these days, we have a lot of electrical devices. So we like lots of current, right? So usually newer homes are built with 12 or 10 gauge wire. All right, the last thing about wire is colors. You should know something about the colors. When we talk about the color, of course, we mean the color of the insulation, the plastic on the outside. Black insulation means that the wire is hot. That means it's always at 110 volts. White wire is wire that is used for the common connection, also called the neutral, and that's always at 0 volts. So remember from our last activity that black and white kind of go together. Black delivers the high energy electricity, and then white takes away the electricity that's had its energy used up. But you have to have both black and white wires, to bring electrical energy to an appliance and then bring it out. Okay, so these kind of go in pairs. There are many other colors of wire. You'll see red, blue, striped, all kinds of things. And usually these other colors indicate that these wires are the output of a switch. So those voltages might be high. They could be at 110 volts if the switch is closed, or they might be at 0 volts if the switch is open. So you have to kind of, use caution if you see wires that are different colors like that. And lastly, green is always used for the ground wire. And remember, the ground wire is always at 0 volts. That's your safety wire. And that typically connects to all the outer metal in the circuit, like a junction box or conduit or things like that. Okay, one important rule of thumb is, even though these are the rules, never assume that wires are properly color-coded when you're working in an existing system, because sometimes people take shortcuts and they don't use the right colors. So it's always good to test things before you get a shock. All right, so a couple more words here about tools and the names of tools. You should know there are different kinds of pliers that are shown here in the upper left corner. Needle nose pliers have a long, skinny nose. Square nose pliers have kind of like a squarish end. All right. and they can be used for different things. A side cutter is used basically just for cutting wires. You'll notice that you can also cut wires with these pliers as well, that there's a cutting tool inside of them, which you'll see when you check out those tools. The tool that's over on the right here is extremely important. It's a wire stripper, and what it does is it takes the insulation off of the wire. And you'll see it looks like pliers, except you've got different size holes, and the holes are for different gauges. So for this particular tool here that I'm showing, you can strip the insulation off of 20 gauge wire, or 22, or 24, or all the way up to 30. And you'll notice that 30 is a really small hole, whereas the 20 is a pretty big hole. So these are the gauges over here. So in our activities in class, you're going to be using 14 gauge wire. So the wire strippers you have will have a 14 gauge setting on here that you can use. And then finally, you've got different kinds of screwdrivers, Phillips head and flathead, and you'll probably need to use both of them to connect wires to outlets and things with screws. All right, and the most important piece of equipment that you have are your safety goggles. And the rule in our class is going to be that the goggles must be worn when you're working with wires and electrical devices. In fact, that means even if your partner or the person at your table is working with these things, you have to wear your goggles. And the main reason is because when you cut wires, a lot of times small pieces shoot off really at high speed. And if that goes into your eye, it's going to cause a problem. So I will expect that as you're working at your tables, that you will have goggles on, and you'll be wearing those as you're working. And that's something that we'll take seriously. If I see that you have the goggles off, I or your teacher are just going to give you a warning. But if that continues to happen, then there are going to be deductions that come off of the spreadsheet for your grade. So please just put them on and wear them for the period, right? And that's the way we're going to do things. Okay, and I think that's about it. You can continue, and if you go back into the activity 8.2, there's a very short video that shows you how to make different connections. You're going to learn how to connect to a terminal screw, and you're going to learn how to put wires together into a pigtail. And you can watch the video there, and it'll show you how to do it. And then once you've done that, you just show your teacher, and your teacher will check you in to see that you've made each of these things. Okay? And that is what you're doing next. So have some fun.